flock around to find out. We'll figure and we'll learn, we'll flock around to find out. Flock around to find out, flock around to find out. Around to find out, to find out. Flock around, flock around. Hour 8, he's only been 10 minutes and he'll aggravate you. So don't watch unless you want to. This is gonna take a long, long time, but we'll visit lots of rabbit holes along the way. We'll talk and we'll learn, we'll flock around to find out. We'll figure out who was right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Kudos is gonna watch a debate, but not just watch a debate. He has to stop it and wait and go back and watch again to get it straight. Hour 8, he's only been 10 minutes and he'll aggravate you. So don't watch unless you want to. This is gonna take a long, long time, but we'll visit lots of rabbit holes along the way. We'll talk and we'll learn, we'll flock around and find out. We'll figure out who was right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Ooh, this is gonna watch a debate, but not just watch a debate. He has to stop it and wait and go back and watch again to get it straight. Hour 8, he's only been 10 minutes and he'll aggravate you. So don't watch unless you want to. This is gonna take a long, long time, but we'll visit lots of rabbit holes along the way. We'll talk and we'll learn, we'll flock around and find out. We'll figure out who was right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Right and wrong. Ooh, ooh.
Sometimes it's good to get the big picture, of course. That's why I'm making this big thing with the with Krita here. But in order to make a true big picture, you have to make sure to get all the little pictures. And on this stream, I like to get granular, you know? I like to get really, really granular. I like to focus in on little moments, little things, little words, and kind of let that, give it its consideration. Squeeze the juice out of it, you know what I mean? Now, I've got a new setup arrangement on my OBS here. I've been having a hard time. If you've ever seen any of my past streams, it's always a mess here, and I'm constantly fussing and fitzing around with it, you know? And I'd like to be able to just have everything sort of laid out to where I don't have to constantly move windows to see things. I've got 2 monitors. And you'd think that'd be enough, but... well, my old eyesight's not so good. And even though I got these here glasses, I still like big text. You know, I like nice big text. And when I want to look at... when I want to see what you see, I've heard of do you see what I see, but do I see what you see? I do see what you see. You see? This here is what I see, which is what is being broadcast to you. Not all of this. You're only, now you're seeing it, but usually you're only seeing what's within these open broadcast software box, right? So I can see that. I can also adjust and move this around at will. I'm sort of the, if this is a little world, I am its god. You know what I mean? I can control all these things. I can make them disappear if I want. I can make everything disappear. It's mad that any one person can have all this power. And I get that. But anyway, so I keep this on the second monitor because this little square right here, I'll make it smaller. This is my primary monitor. You're just seeing exactly what I'm seeing on the primary monitor. So you can imagine if you're watching, you know, whatever. I don't know if you're on a phone or a tablet or whatever. I don't care. But like, you can imagine me. I'm at a desktop computer. And this means I am looking at a big old rectangle, and then another big old rectangle, and then I'm looking at a circle. Do you know what the circle is? Here, I'll turn the circle off. Oh, that's not too bad. I have another light. That's not too bad either. This little camera doesn't do too bad. The only other light is just like a regular kitchen light. Maybe I don't fucking need this thing. I don't need this circle. Okay, so redress. I've only got 2 rectangles. I've still got a circle, but it's not blaring light at me anymore. Is that okay? I don't know. Type F's in the chat if you think it's not bright enough. Type G's in the chat if I can be, you know, wherever I want to go. But I thought it'd be key to put me right here, because when I'm looking at my screen, I'm actually looking down. So now I'm looking here, but it kind of looks like I'm, you know, looking down at what I'm usually talking about. Or if I look up my chat room window, if I ever had a chatter, it's very, very rare around here, which is because my fans know my number one rule is don't watch the streams. They're boring. They're super boring. So I have millions of fans, but they're all very loyal fans, and they do what I tell them. And I've consistently told them all, please stay away from the live streams. Go about your life. I say at ease, as you were. And I tell them to stand back, stand by, but fuck off. But don't ever watch me, ever. That's my number one rule. Never, ever watch the streams. But if you do, I want you to write your opinions up here. Well, you don't have to write them up here. Write them on your fucking... I don't know what you kids have these days. Write it on your TikTok or whatever. But make it so it shows up here. And, you know, it'll be something. It'll be something to do. It'll be something to think about. Something to talk about. If anyone ever is watching live, yeah, that's my only rules. You have to chat and you have to say like your opinion and stuff. But you don't actually have to. You can just watch if you want and not comment at all. That's fine too. But again, I do recommend that nobody watch. This is going to be boring. Our part 3 of hour 2, I actually recorded that today in the morning. So you had morning time me. I watched back a little bit of it, and I was very cranky, if I do say so myself. I think I was a little more on edge. Now, I think part of that was Steven, Benny, and Lex were all being infuriatingly dumb and difficult. Let's take a look at what we have so far. This is hour 2, and it's not completed yet. And, you know, I'm actually thinking about tacking on another 7 minutes just so that we can call hour 2 plus 7 minutes, because that's the end of the topic, at least as it's been partitioned out by Lex. We're under partition. October 7th discussion starts there. And like, yeah, we're not ready for that. We're not blasting through these debates like just because a debate says it's 5 hours long, it doesn't mean that it's going to take us 5 hours to watch it. That's not how we do things around here. Because we are slow learners. And we need to slow everything down. We need to stop. Say it again. What was that? Let's take that back. Let's think about that. Let's consider that. Let's look at that from different angles. Let's go back and reread what we remembered before. See if we remembered it correctly. You know, because a lot of times debates will refer back to things said earlier in the debate. And our advantage is that we can go back and check that and see if they're right. For instance, one time Benny was like, that word you keep using, exclusive, it's so incorrect. That word, you keep using it over and over. And we go back and check the record. He said exclusively one time. That word you use over and over, exclusive. Or we have the likes like of Pestiny Bonell. I like him better when he's pixelated. Like that's a good picture of Destiny right here. See that? I do appreciate the pixelated version of it. So here's what he did is in his opening statement, after the other two guys already talked, all three of these guys talked, he went last. His opening statement was a complete straw man against argument against someone who's against a position that nobody on this side has made. Right? But he frames it as, whenever people talk about 1947, they never want to talk about this. And he just names, claiming that no one ever wants to talk about or admit the fact that the Arabs rejected the partition resolution by the UN. Right? And if you watched, if you went through this debate in as much slow, excruciating detail as I have, that becomes more and more absurd, right? Because I think I spent probably like 6 hours and listened to his opening statement several times. I made an AI song out of large parts of it, just to get it in my head. The Arab side rejected outright the partition resolution. Moeen Rabbani also went to explain that very well. He explained how the partition resolutions were unfair, but that the main reason that they rejected them in principle, whether they were perceived as fair or unfair, it was out of principle that they refused to agree to allow all these people to just carve up their land, throw up borders, and enforce them with violence and turn the indigenous people into second-class citizens or worse, to slaughter them and drive them out of the land, right? So what's Stephen's big thing? Well, it turns out that the Arabs would have rejected any partition plan that included their state. It wasn't just because it was unfair. So he's like, okay, fine, it was unfair. But even if it were fair, they wouldn't have signed it. Like, okay, I can almost see it from his perspective. Like he was having this argument and he lost that argument against someone else. And now he's trying to reframe it as if he never was making that argument, kind of. But he didn't listen or pay attention to anything that these guys said. We did. And by we, I mean me and anyone who's watched these streams. We know what these guys argued. They both laid out very strong, long and strong, just how I like them, opening statements. I mean, I'm talking persuasive, historical, matter-of-fact, logical, detailed, dense, concise. There wasn't a lot of fluff, you know what I mean? They tried to tell a lot in a few words because they're well practiced at it. They described a lot of history and a lot of facts and a lot of events and crammed them all into one thing, and pulling out the relevant ones that support their main argument. They did a beautiful job of that. Stephen, in fact, we can look at this. This was his opening statement. You know, the green I chose for this just doesn't quite pop the way it does in hour 2. And you know what? We can change that. Krita is a beautiful program. I can select colors with this similar color selection tool, the aptly named. So here's the dull, dirty green, and here's this bright neon green. And what we can do is just pull out our brush tool, and let's increase the size of that. Ooh, it's like power washing. Oh, I should do something like that. Should just draw a desaturated color and then get a brush and pick a more saturated color and just brush over it slowly. I could probably make YouTube videos of that, like oddly satisfying. Okay, anyway. So this was Destiny's fucking opening statement. So the red is Finkelstein's statement. Each horizontal line is a minute. So Norm has this beautiful long opening statement. Benny Morris has one about half as long, with a little guest. You see this little gray bar here, and then it goes back to blue? That's because good old Lexifer Friedman, the moderator, wanted to jump in and help him. And he went in and he's just like, wow, so like the Arabs killed all those people? Damn. Just to be clear, this was offensive attacks from the Arabs. Is that right? Wow. Okay, great. And then he goes on and keeps talking. Then we get Moin Rabbani, who makes a lovely opening statement. Doesn't go quite as long as Norm, but it's a sizable amount. It's longer than Benny. Here comes Bozo Bonnell. And he does 3 minutes. And you know, like they say, Lex was actually kind of, right before this, he makes a remark about how Steven talks 10 times faster than he does. Now, that would be interesting to look at. You know, at some point, we're going to take these colored bars, and maybe we can assign a number, how many words were said in that time, and figure out. Because, I don't know, to me, he wasn't talking too fast. He actually does get really rushed at other points. I don't know if he was. Yeah, but the thing is, it wasn't just him talking fast and saying a lot in a quick time. He didn't say very much, right? He spent a lot of his time with fluff and preambles. And so, like, when I talk about this kind of problem, the thing that I run into a lot with a lot of other people when they're also discussing this problem with me, right? Just all of that is complete fucking nonsense. And he never says anything specific. He never references anything these guys said. I think he like says like, as you said, or something like that, but he wasn't actually referencing any specific point that they said. The dude to some extent, I guess he's listening, or technically he's hearing them, because he does like have some retorts or something that are somewhat vaguely related, and he seems to have like a sense of when to jump in. He's doing that kind of listening, but he's not actually taking in what these guys' argument is, because these guys open up and they both talk about how the partition resolution was not accepted by either side, because the Jews intended to not honor the Zionists intended to not honor the borders. They were going to expand the borders and they were going to drive people out. They weren't going to abide by some of the little details in the partition plan. But they were going to abide by the fact that they get to now be a state, and now they have precedence and recognition by the UN, and Bob's your uncle. You know what I mean? Every single time this guy opens his mouth, he says some variation of, well, the Arabs rejected the partition resolution, so that means that they were inherently evil and hated peace and hated Jews. Why? Well, because the partition resolution would have meant that they could have lived together in peace. So it's double wrong, because no, the partition agreement did not mean that they could all live together in peace. It created a dual class system where the white European guys got to be number one and the indigenous Muslim, Palestinian, Arab people had to die. You fuck. Right? So he's wrong about that. But he's also wrong that even if it was like, here's a deal for perfect world peace, will you sign it? And they refuse to sign it. So therefore, all the people on that continent, on that land, who are not Jewish, are fucking animals. They're scum. They're worse than scum. They're the scum on the bottom of the shoes of the scum. Scum wear shoes, and on the bottom of their shoes, they have more scum. And that's these people. Why? Because they refuse to sign the greatest deal. Like, what? No. I mean, even if that were true, even supposing, let's take that for granted. It's a frustrating argument because he gets you it's wrong in two ways, right? And you don't know which way to approach it first, right? And he's probably holding up a shield. He knows how to counter either one of the things, right? Because he's made this dumb shit argument before and he's heard the answer to it. In a professional setting, he can effectively be ignored because he talks so passively. He's like, what I often see people do is that they cherry pick and they make it seem like the Jews were just so violent. But actually, when you look at the facts, it was the Arabs who were actually so violent all the time. And also they were selling their land. He likes to talk about that. He tries to slip that in a lot. But people sold their land. He's talking about Palestinians in Palestine selling land, selling a house, selling a plot. What does that have to do with making it so it's not your country anymore and you have to fuck off? Just because I sold a house? Just because I sold part of my land to a foreigner? That's not the same as now this isn't your country anymore. Just like if you live in the United States and you sell your house to an Italian man, it doesn't mean that his house is now Italy. So you wouldn't expect to be like, hey, otherwise people would be like, dude, never ever make sure no Chinese people ever buy this house because then it'll technically be China, and if too many people do it, they'll take over a whole country. That would be a thing. That's not a thing, because that's not how it works. So if Palestinians are making sales of land and land deals, which even if they were doing it at a really high rate, it would for the window of time that we're talking about, like in this 100 years, they would not have like sold the whole fucking country, right? And plus, the parts that they sold wouldn't not be that country. It would just be someone's property in that country, right? So it's like, oh yeah, I have a farm in Palestine. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, I just sold my farm in Palestine here, and I'm going to go to this other part of Palestine. I decide to move. Want to see a different climate in my same country, but it's fine. It's the same country. I can just go move there and there. Oh, okay. So I'll sell my farm. Oh, this foreigner, this Jewish guy wants to come get it. All right, cool. I mean, it's fucking 1920, and I don't think that there's ever going to be a big problem with a lot more people with the same religion of him coming in and deciding to become, genocidal nationalist freaks. There's no reason for me to think that, because I own a farm in Palestine in like 1916 or whatever. It's like, oh shit, World War I. That was nuts. Glad that's over. I should sell this fucking farm and fuck off up north. Maybe I'll get a different kind of job. Maybe I'll do something different. I'm gonna sell my farm to this friendly Jewish fella. He just emigrated here. So, all right, cool. Well, anyway, I'm gonna now pack up my bags and travel across my own country to this other place. And hey, maybe I'll come back and visit. Come back and have a little visit, have a little chat with all my old neighbors and stuff, and come back and visit and see how the place has been. Because of course I'm free to travel through my country. I can travel there and travel back. That's just a thing that people can do in their own country where they were born, right? So, because I sold my land, that in no way means that I wish that this wasn't my country anymore. Now, if I want to fuck off and go to the north of my country, check out a different climate, check out some new stuff, instead of just being able to fucking go there, I have to go through 8 different border checkpoints, wait for hours, get permission. Oh, they didn't even give, so I can't even do that. Okay. Can't even go there. Oh, there's like this really cool place, this really cool town on the coast. Oh no, you can't go there anymore. It's now called Tel Aviv, and you have to stay away always. You're never ever allowed to go there because you stink. That's what I hope for in my country. I hope that I can't go to various random places throughout, probably all the richest, best places. Maybe I can't go there anymore. And even if I want to go to a place that I can technically go to, I have to pass through this other country, and they won't let me. Or they only let me do it on Thursday. Or I have to wait and get special permission. 1 hour drive, but I have to wait for 4 hours. And they touch my dick. Oh, great. And they're slapping my dick around. Oh, boy. So it's very different. That's what I'm getting at. Is that, like, it's very different to sell a plot of land, partition your country, and have one half of it be a genocidal ethno-state. That's a totally different thing. Steven just tries to conflate these things together and say, like, because he's trying to paint this whole idea of the Nakba is how historically we see 700,000 Palestinian Arabs being displaced ending up in various parts of the world in various numbers. And he thinks it's really, really relevant to bring up how all these land deal, how they were selling all this land. Later on, I think the next time Rabbani talks, he goes, very, very little of the Palestinian displacement was due to private land sales. Directly contradicting that point. Boo, boo, boo. Sorry, Steven. You should have planned. I mean, honestly, he probably didn't even notice because he's definitely not listening to the actually understand. He doesn't fucking, to him, it's not really all that important, the exact truth of whatever matter. He just wants to do like the theater of debate. You know how there's like security theater? The theater of security. You know, if you have people with badges all standing around and you've got metal detectors and you've got x-ray machines, everyone's just like, looks like they're just trying to keep it all safe. It just looks very safe. I mean, and a lot of people will probably report, I feel safer because all those people with badges and latex gloves were looking at the computer monitors with the x-rays, and they let everybody through, so there seemed to be no problem. That means we're not in danger of the old 9/11. No 9/11's happening to us. So that's great. It's the theater of security. So security theater is a little bit what he's doing, but he's doing debate theater. He's doing the intellectual theater. He talks a bit fast, talks on the fast side. I wouldn't say he's a super fast talker, although we're only in our second hour of the debate. He could change. But he also makes up straw men and dismantles them, hoping no one will notice that nobody ever argued. Nobody ever took that straw man's position. That's why it was a straw man. Makes up, inflates a fact, tries to tie it to the relevant point, and that fact is later contradicted by his partner within however many minutes that is. Within 10 minutes. So he's fucking useless. His whole opening statement can be thrown away. It was complete garbage. It was arguing against straw men and making completely bogus claims that are factually not true as determined by your own fucking guy. The blue is Benny Morris. Blue Benny directly contradicted his point because Benny Morris is not an idiot, and he knows that displacement by sales was often not just, it wasn't just fucking like a little a happy guy selling his farm and going to live somewhere else. It was people like assuming themselves to be landlords of places because they and other white men got together and signed pieces of paper and exchanged money and gave them legal rights to kick off all the, quote, squatters off their land because they don't have a deed. Huh. These motherfuckers, just because they lived there for generations, you'd think they had a thought to get a deed. Because whoever has this piece of paper gets to be the one that owns the land. So, I don't know about you, but Benny knew that, and he's like, no, very little of that happened. Because he was trying to minimize it. He was trying to say like, no, it wasn't a lot of that. That's not a big significant part of it. The second time Destiny came in, let's go back to that. Where's that? 47. Allow me to finish. Yeah, okay, this is back from his opening statement. When he's trying to say that he's listening, like he's not listening, he says, it's funny because it was brought up before that the partition plan was unfair, and that's why the Arabs rejected it, as though they rejected it because it was unfair. Because the amount of land that Jews were given, when I don't think that was the reality of the circumstances. Okay. Just how many words, this example of the fluff. It's funny because it was brought up before that the partition plan was unfair, and that's why the Arabs rejected it. That's his whole point. It was brought up before. This, I'll bold all of it. This is all just fluff. Fluff and repetition. All he wanted to say was this underline. All he needed to say was this underline part to make his point. It's funny because... What's funny? Because it was brought up before that the partition... Oh, because he's saying it's funny because it's ridiculous to say that the partition plan was unfair, and that's why the Arabs rejected it. And then he does this as though, right? So now he's doing like actual theater, literal theater. I think this guy was a theater kid. As though they rejected it because it was unfair. Because of the amount of land that Jews were given was not just due to the fact that Jews were given land at all. As though a 30% partition or a 25% partition would have been accepted, when I don't think that was the reality of the circumstances. So what's wrong with this? Okay, all of this is fluff. Because he says the partition plan was unfair, and then he just gives examples of that, as though they rejected it because it was unfair. So the partition plan was unfair, and that's why the Arabs rejected it, as though they rejected it because it was unfair. This is just like, it's funny. It's funny fluff. It's funny to me. I'm laughing at this. But it's so fucking stupid. Because this is an example of how he's talking and he's making you think that he's smart. But he said, it was brought up before that. That's fluff too. Fucking A. Just say you said. You said the partition plan. You said the partition plan was unfair, and that's why the Arabs rejected it. I don't think that's true. That's his whole point. All of those words. And it's because he's just fluffing everything up. It's funny because it was brought up before. It was brought up before. Bro, nobody brought up this point. Okay? You wrote this in your notes that you read aloud that were the leftover notes from the last debate you had on this. You're like, oh, I'll just probably use my same opening statement. And he's reading, it was brought up before that, blah, blah, blah. Now, He may have been half listening. Okay, I might give him that. Because what he said was, what Rabbani did say, he explained how it was unfair. But he didn't say that was the reason why they rejected it. He said they rejected it outright on principle. On principle. So Stephen went right after him to give his opening statement. And funnily enough, he's talking about Arabs selling their own land. Again, I talked about that for hours already. And then he says that it's really funny that you said, and then says something he never said, and then goes through a whole, like, as though they did because of this. And then he's like, a different percentage, such as 30%, or such as 25%. And then let's say I disagree, or that's not true, or that wasn't reality. Let's try to douche it up a little bit and say it in a really like dumbass but sounding smart, dumbass trying to sound smart kind of way. Is I don't think that was the reality of the circumstances. That's a good. We need to collect some of these pull-out quotes of Stevens, because there's another thing. What was it? I'm just curious for the incorporation of the answer. I'm just curious for the incorporation of the answer. I'm just curious for the incorporation of the answer. Yeah. These are some like prime Destinyisms. Okay? It's like the overcomplicating a very, very simple idea to try to mask how vapid it is. Because if I just said that, if I made his point, but made it very clear, then people would immediately go, no, I didn't. I didn't say that. So rather than being like, you said the Arabs rejected it because it was unfair. Instead, you say, it's really funny because it was brought up earlier that the partition plan wasn't fair, and that's why the Arabs rejected it, as though they rejected it because it was unfair. Because the amount of land that Jews were given, and not just due to the fact that Jews were given land at all, as though a 30% partition or a 25% partition would have been accepted. They rejected it because of fair, because of the amount of land that Jews were given. Right. But that's not it. They're like, you're not going to give any of your land to our ethno-state? No. We're not giving any land to your ethno-state. Stephen is fighting an imaginary opponent, and this here's the imaginary opponent's position. Well, the partition plan was just a little bad, so that's why they rejected it. They would have accepted 25%. Yes, they would have. And what argument does Stephen have against this? As though they rejected it. I don't think that was the reality of the circumstances. Why not? Was there ever 25% on the table? Can you point out where that deal was offered and or rejected? Even against his straw man. He's like trying to fight the straw man, and he's like, he starts hugging it. It's like, dude, you're not fighting the straw man. You're just jerking off the straw man. Stop sucking off a straw man. Because one, it's a straw man, and two, you're not even fighting it. You're not even making a fucking argument against it. You just have to say as though. It's funny that it was brought up that this happened, as though this happened, as though this happened. I don't think that was the reality of the circumstances. I feel like most other stuff has been said. Really? Most other stuff has been said? Most other stuff has been said. I notice that whenever people talk about 48 or the years preceding 48, I think the worst thing that happens is there's a cherry picking of the facts, where basically all the blame is ascribed to the built-in idea of Zionism that, because of a handful of quotes or because of an ideology, we can say that expulsion was always going to happen. When I think there's a refusal sometimes as well to acknowledge that, regardless of the idea of some Zionist leaders, there's a political, social, and military reality on the ground that they're forced to contend with. Weird argument. Weird. Because this alone, the underlined part, is not only... nobody has a refusal to acknowledge it. Maybe sometimes they do. Again, what a weird thing to say. If you're trying to say they reject this or they refuse to see this, I guess. But sometimes there's a refusal. Okay, maybe. Well, I don't know what you mean by that. But this is something that Norm points out when arguing against Stephen. Regardless of the ideas, there's a political, social, and military reality on the ground. Stephen doesn't want to get any more specific than that. He's saying you can't blame Zionists and their ideology for expelling the Arabs. Because, yeah, sure, they all had this ideology, but there was also political, social, and military reality. Okay, what's the reality? Here's the idea of reality. The Arabs, unfortunately, because of their inability to engage in diplomacy and only use tools of war, basically always gave the Jews a reason or an excuse to fight and acquire land through that way because of their refusal to negotiate on anything else. Right. Then he mentions two other like things. One of them being the partition plan, and another one being this one other thing called the Lausanne Peace Conference. And then he describes that Lausanne Peace Conference Yeah, so it's stupid. So stupid man made a stupid bullshit opening statement. Benny Morris, whatever. His was also pretty gross because he I want to go. We're gonna skip over that. Next time Destiny talks, he says, I'll respond to that and then a question for Norm to take into account, I think, when he answers Benny, because I am curious. You see what I'm talking about, Fluff? I am curious. Lie. All right. Fluff. So, yeah, basically he just wants to talk about the partition plan again. He's going to make his same argument. He's going to also name drop another thing that he just says the name of and doesn't talk about. Doesn't say what it means or what it implies or anything. Just says, I'm sure we'll talk about it. He says, the issue I run into is, yeah, you have evidence for your claims, but I have feelings that something different. And then he asks them, how do you explain the fact that the Jews accepted the 47 partition plan? Remember, this is his attack helicopter. This is the one argument he has. It's not even a good one. It's one of those arguments where it's got a false premise, but it's also an invalid argument. So if you get an invalid argument with a false premise, what do you go after? Do you go after the false premise or do you go after the validity of the argument? I think most people find it easier to go after the false premise, maybe. Because sometimes it can be hard to explain logic to someone. Because usually if it's like, if I want to explain how your argument is, I might make an analogous argument on a different topic. But then you start confusing people again because they think you're just comparing them to whatever your analogous topic was. Right? So if you're like, no, that's not the correct logic. That's like saying, but if you say that, that's like saying all rectangles are squares. And they're like, what? I'm not a fucking square. It's like, no, I didn't say you're a square. I'm just saying the logic, like, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. You know what I mean? Dude, I am not a fucking square or a rectangle. What the fuck are you talking about? You know, you run into those people. How could you compare me? How could you compare me to a butterfly? I didn't say you're like a butterfly. I just said it was a butterfly effect. What are you going to do with these people? All right, so he makes a dumb attack helicopter. He just says his same argument. What about the partition plan in 47? Did that mean the Arabs hated peace? And this is when he was curious for the incorporation of the answer. And Norm talked, got interrupted. And then Stephen, this was Stephen talking again in the interruption by saying, well, yeah, real quick, just to be clear that the contention is that Norm is quoting a part and saying that this was the entire reason for this, whereas Benny's saying it's a part of that. Total nonsense. Norm is not quoting a part. Norm is not saying that this was the entire reason for this. Norm was saying that according to Benny Morris in his own writing, he filled out 25 pages full of evidence and the conclusion that transfer was inevitable and inbuilt into Zionism. Now, if you don't know what that sentence means, that's okay. Transfer is the euphemism for forcibly expelling people from the land. So to say transfer is inevitable and inbuilt into Zionism, Zionism is the ideology behind what Jewish people, they were Jewish. Not all Jewish people are Zionists, right? Zionism is this idea that there is a land only for Jewish people, and that's Israel. It should be only for Jewish people. And they have to have a clear majority. And they have to have complete power. Okay? Zionism can be compared or analogous to something like manifest destiny, American exceptionalism, frontier, Wild West, right? This is our land. From California to the New York Island, right? It's our land. From sea to shining sea, right? From the river to the sea, that's anti-Semitic. From sea to shining sea, good shit, right? So just like how America was like, this is all our land, we, me, white people, not anyone else, just the white people. Yeah, it's our land. That's what America did. They said from sea to shining motherfucking sea. And they said manifest destiny. They said we must manifest, meaning literally show up there, be there in the flesh. And it's ours. It's our destiny to go and take it. Okay? That's what Zionism thinks about Israel. And when they say us, we, it's only Jewish people, right? And it's mostly only the white Jewish people. It's a racist, fucked up, genocidal ethno-state. It's just as bad and evil as the, colonial America that genocided all the native from this land, the Canadians, the fucking Spanish, the fucking Portuguese, the fucking French, the fucking British. It's just like all that shit. They're doing it right now. The shit you read in the history books about the atrocities and the genocides of the past, it's happening right now. Right fucking now. There's children literally starving to death right now. And it's all happening thanks to the US, thanks to England, thanks to all the Western powers who have enabled this and let this get this bad. Just hands off. Just bystander effect. It's fucking disgusting. We're living through it. We're living through something. I mean, this is going to be the biggest thing in history. In the future, they're going to be teaching history classes to higher level advanced history. They're going to be like, okay, we're going back to early 20th century. So there was a group called the Nazis, and they were led by a guy called Adolf Hitler. And you could think of them, they were basically the 1900s version of Israel, And funnily enough, some of their most of their of Hitler's victims ended up being Jewish people. Imagine Israel, but in the 1900s, right? They're gonna compare this atrocity, the Palestinian genocide of the 2020s, as being it's gonna be the thing. The Holocaust will have been overshadowed. All the other atrocities, they won't give a fuck about them anymore. What's happening right now is so fucked up, incredibly evil. They are starving Palestinians, and Israel's doing it directly, but all the strongest nations in the world are doing fuck all to do anything. They're doing fuck all. And it's infuriating. There's nothing we can do about it. Okay, so what were we talking about again? Hour 2. So this is where Steven starts to pick up the pace. He doesn't make a lot of long statements. He never goes more than 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 seconds at most. It's mostly just little things. I think here's his longest. He goes, a minute. We're treated to a lot of back and forth. Rabbani and Morris. Stephen poking his ass in there every once in a while. But let's see. His first one was at about 4 minutes in. He goes, dude, nobody would ever give up their land. The partition agreement was not only wasn't an unfair deal, like it wasn't even a deal at all. Right choice to give up part of your country, even if it meant losing a war 50 years down the line. And he goes, and Destiny says, sure, I like that answer more than what I feel like I'm usually hearing when it comes to Palestine. And he goes on for 5, 10, 15, 17 seconds, just babbling. Oh, no, that's this one. That's this line here. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 27 seconds or something. Just babbling that somebody else doesn't make that argument. And then what I say to that argument is that it wasn't. It wasn't. That's his conclusion. So he spends 27 seconds saying, what I usually feel like I'm hearing when it comes to Palestine rejection of the 47th plan, I feel like it's weird. A weird switch happens. A weird switch happens where Arabs are seen as pragmatic, who are simply doing a calculation and saying, and then he does his theater kid thing. He's in the voice of the hypothetical non-existent Palestinian who's rejecting the partition plan based on the mathematics. Well, we're losing 55% of our land. Jews are only maybe 1/3 of the people here, and we've got 45, and the math doesn't work. Right? And again, this is him saying, as if the Palestinians are going, well, blah, 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 right? And again, nobody's claiming that. Like, the facts of what percentage of people made up that country, and even what percentage of the land was actually in this plan wasn't necessarily clear. These are numbers that we come up with based on research after the fact. Okay? So nobody's really arguing that on the ground at that time, Palestinians were saying, well, we are 55 or 66% of our country, and this partition plan gives only 45% to us. And then the math doesn't work. Like, again, he's making it purposely stupid because he's saying, as if that's true. He's also saying, well, I'm sure glad that you're not making this argument, because usually I feel I'm hearing other people make this argument. I feel like they make this argument that the Palestinians rejected it by doing calculations. As if, right? As if they're going, oh, this is 55 and that's 45. That's not fair. But it wasn't a math problem, like you said. It was an ideology problem. A math problem? An ideology problem. A math problem, an ideology problem. I actually didn't really notice this before, but here's some more conflation. A math problem, in mathematics, it means a question. A math question. An ideology problem means something concerning or dangerous or hazardous in some way, right? A problem. Fucking dickhead. The problem, why didn't they want to sell their land? Oh, they have this problem. This ideology problem. Okay. Spent a lot of time. It's been an hour. God, we haven't even watched it. Haven't watched a bit yet. Oh, okay, that's right. I get real mad at Lex again. Dude, Lex, we're gonna have like the top 10 sins of Lex as moderator. Just breaking rules as a moderator. We're gonna nail his ass. We're gonna get his ass. Here's a part where he pisses me off again. When he asked Benny to do, he asked Moin Rabbani to do a closing statement. Moin Rabbani fucking spits fire for 5-6 minutes. Just straight fire. Makes an absolutely devastating case. Nailing Israel to the fucking wall or whatever. Just sticking it to it. And, calmly and carefully, like an assassin, deconstructing any hope of thinking that the state of Israel is some kind of moral or just actor in any of this. They've been rotten to the core since their inception. It's nothing but black hearts all the way down. It's people who want to co-opt the religion of Judaism to try to make a racist ethno-state built off the back of the indigenous people. He lays it out brilliantly, and he leads it all the way up to today, where, hey, it is still an apartheid state. Lexifer says, you're really tempting a response from the other side. You're really tempting a response from the other side, mine. Motherfuck, that pissed me off so hard. And pissing and whining. You're really tempting a response from the other side on the last few sentences. And we'll talk about the claims of apartheid and so on. It's a fascinating discussion. We need to have it. You centrist ass piece of shit. Whatever. There's nothing technically wrong with saying that, but you just sound like a fucking fool. Look, we'll talk about apartheid. It's fascinating. Fascinating. Is it? Because it's an apartheid state. It's kind of hard to argue it's not. I guess they're going to do that. I haven't listened on yet. I listened to Norm. So what happened is Benny, I believe, is going to jump in. So yeah, starting on this green here, just like here we go. Starting here on this green is the closing statements of this part of the historical section of the debate, right? So, Lexigram tells them, okay, we're going to wrap up this topic. Please make your closing statements, right? Steven goes for a minute and 40 seconds. Rabbani goes for a minute and 50 seconds. Sorry, I keep calling him Rabbani. Benny Morris. I'm getting Benny and Rabbani mixed up a lot in my head. or in my mouth. In my head, I know them. And I know their colors. Blue Benny, purple Rabani, purple Moeen. I should call him Moeen. His first name's Moeen. Moeen and Benny. So anyway, Stephen, Benny, Moeen makes a good long one. It's so good that he tempts them to respond. And then Norm. What Norm does really well is he says this line, and I agree with Lex. Everybody has the right to rescind what they've said in the past. But what you cannot claim is that you didn't say what you said. I'll stick to the history, not the current propaganda. 1917, the Zionist movement began way before the British supported the Zionist movement for decades. In 1917, the British jumped in and issued the Balfour Declaration supporting the emergence of a Jewish national home in Palestine. Yeah, I think the Zionist movement began in like 1897 or something like that. I mean, yeah. But in 1917, the British jumped in and issued the Balfour Declaration supporting the emergence of a Jewish national home in Palestine. Let's actually listen to him and actually queued it back. We're gonna do everyone's closing statement again. I'm gonna try not to pause too much, although Stephen might tempt me into pausing. Stephen, why did you tempt me into responding to you? That's what all of these guys are doing. They're tempting a response from me. No, let's take it back to 137:40. 137:40. That's 138. 137:48. Okay. So we're going to hear on that point of agreement, on this brief light of agreement, let's wrap up with this topic of history. Yeah, okay, buddy. On that point of agreement, let's wrap it up. Yeah, indeed. Here we go.
Point of agreement, let us on this one brief light of agreement, let us wrap up with this topic of history and move on to modern day. But before that, I'm wondering if we could just say a couple of last words on this topic. Stephen?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the behaviors of both parties in the time period around 48, or especially 48 and earlier, there's this assumption that there was this huge built-in mechanism of Zionism and that it was going to be inevitable from the inception of the first Zionist thought, I guess, that appeared in Herzl's mind, that there would be a mass violent population transfer of Arab Palestinians out of what would become the Israeli state. I understand that there are some quotes that we can find that maybe seem to possibly support an idea that looks close to that, but I think when you actually consult the record of what happened, when you look at the populations, the massive populations that Israel was willing to accept within what would become their state borders, their nation borders, I just don't think that the historical record agrees with the idea that Zionists would have just never been okay living alongside Arab Palestinians. But when you look at the other side, Arabs would out of hand reject literally any deal that apportioned any amount of that land for any state relating to Jewish people or the Israeli people. I think it was said even on the other end of the table that...
Yep, it's his attack helicopter. He's just saying, on one hand, Jews accepted the partition resolution, so therefore, they definitely weren't thinking of doing violent population transfer. Because they agreed to sign a document that said they didn't have to, that they shouldn't do it. I don't even know if the agreement said that you can't do population transfer. He's just saying it would have included a lot of Arab Palestinians. And then on the other hand, the Arabs refused to sign the agreement, so therefore they're bad. It's the same argument. He just stretches it out with all the fluff Yeah, and I think that when you look at the behaviors of both parties in the time period around 48, or especially 48 and earlier, yeah, because they literally had a built-in mechanism of inevitable of transfer in 48. Benny Morris said there was never a top-down policy for expulsion of Arabs until 47. So in 48, they already had one. They literally had a huge mechanism for mass transfer. Violent. Yeah. There was a huge built-in mechanism. And so he's like, well, especially if you look at the time before that, especially 48, especially after that and earlier before that, there's this assumption that there was a huge built-in mechanism. Violent transfer. And I can understand that there is some evidence of that. That evidence maybe seems to possibly support something that looks close to that. But I think when you actually consult the record of what happened? Mass violent population transfer, by the way. That's what actually happened. If you consult the record of what happened... No, when Stephen says what happened, it doesn't mean what happened in life, in reality. He means what would have happened if the Arabs had accepted the partition resolution. He said the massive populations that Israel was willing to accept within what would become their state borders. They were willing to do something. I don't think that historical record agrees that they would have just never been okay living alongside Arab Palestinians. But when you look at the other side, Arabs would out of hand reject literally any deal that apportioned any amount of land. So, I mean, just restating this thing from the very beginning, he's been saying the same fucking dumb argument that's already been addressed so many times. That's why it's his attack helicopter. And you know what? We might not hear this attack helicopter again because this is his closing statement on the issue. Although, I have a feeling it might come back because we might have a Hamas version of this attack helicopter. Or some kind of, hey, there was some offer from someone, they're going to say some bullshit like that. But one thing is, we cannot be fooled by this silly argument anymore because we're seeing how silly it is. We're seeing that it's not only silly because it's factually wrong. The partition agreement did not equate to peace and Arabs and Jews living in peace together. It implied horrible violence and disruptive bisecting of communities inside that were once inside of a nation, which was free. And the second thing is that it doesn't follow logically. Even if it was a good deal, just because these people turned down a good deal, it doesn't mean that all the people have to pay for that for 100 years. Okay? You can fuck off with that. That's bullshit. All right, let's keep going.
Arab Palestinians would have never accepted, the Arabs would have never accepted any Jewish state whatsoever. So it's interesting that on the ideology part, where it's claimed that Zionists are people of exclusion and supremacy and expulsion, we can find that in diary entries, but we can find that expressed in very real terms on the Arab side, I think in all of their behavior around 48 and earlier, where the goal was the destruction of the Israeli state. It would have been the dispossession of many Jewish people. It probably would have been the expulsion of a lot of them back to Europe. And I think that very clearly plays out in the difference between the actions of the Arabs versus some diary entries of some Jewish leaders.
Benny?
Well, one thing which stood out, and I think Moeen made this point, is that the Arabs had nothing to do with the Holocaust, but then the world community forced the Arabs to pay the price for the Holocaust. That's the traditional Arab army attacking Jews in Palestine and attacking the British to make sure they didn't allow Jews to reach this safe haven. That's important. The second thing is, of course, there's no point in belittling the fact that the Palestinian Arab National Movement's leader, Husseini, worked for the Nazis in the 1940s. He got a salary from the German Foreign Ministry. He raised troops among Muslims in Bosnia for the SS, and he broadcast to the Arab world calling for the murder of the Jews in the Middle East. This is what he did. And the Arabs, since then, have been trying to whitewash Husseini's role. I'm not saying he was the instigator of the Holocaust, but he helped the Germans along in doing what they were doing, and supported them in doing that. So this can't be removed from the fact that the Arabs, as you say, paid a price for the Holocaust, but they also participated in various ways in helping it happen.
I'll make 2 points. The first is you mentioned Haj Amin al-Husseini and his collaboration with the Nazis. Entirely legitimate point to raise, but I think one can also say definitively, had Haj Amin al-Husseini never existed, the Holocaust would have played out precisely as it did.
Certainly.
As far as Palestinian opposition to Jewish immigration to Palestine during the 1930s is concerned, it was of a different character than, for example, British and American rejection of Jewish immigration. They just didn't want Jews on their soil.
Yeah, objectively, it helped the Germans kill the Jews.
In the Palestinian case, their opposition to Jewish immigration was to prevent the transformation of their homeland into a Jewish state that would dispossess them. And I think that's an important distinction to make. The other point I wanted to make is we've spent the past several hours talking about Zionism, transfer, and so on. But I think there's a more fundamental aspect to this, which is that Zionism, I think, would have emerged and disappeared as yet one more utopian political project had it not been for the British, what the preeminent Palestinian historian Walid Khalidi has termed the British Shield. Because I think without the British sponsorship, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. The British sponsored Zionism for a very simple reason, which is that during World War I, the Ottoman armies attempted to march on the Suez Canal. Suez Canal was the jugular vein of the British Empire, between Europe and India. And the British came to the conclusion that they needed to secure the Suez Canal from any threat. And as the British have done so often in so many places, how do you deal with this? Well, you bring in a foreign minority, implant them amongst a hostile population, and establish a protectorate over them. I don't think a Jewish state in Palestine had been part of British intentions. And the Balfour Declaration very specifically speaks about a Jewish national home in Palestine. In other words, a British protectorate. Things ended up taking a different course. And I think the most important development was World War II. And I think this had maybe less to do with the Holocaust and more to do with the effective bankruptcy of the United Kingdom during that war and its inability to sustain its global empire. It ended up giving up India, ended up giving up Palestine. And it's in that context, I think, that we need to see the emergence of a Jewish state in Palestine. And again, a Jewish state means a state in which the Jewish community enjoys not only a demographic majority, but an uncontestable demographic majority, an uncontestable territorial hegemony, and an uncontestable political supremacy. And that is also why, after 1948, the nascent Israeli state confiscated, I believe, up to 90% of lands that had been previously owned by Palestinians who became citizens of Israel. It is why the new Israeli state imposed a military government on its population of Palestinian citizens between 1948 and 1966. It is why the Israeli state effectively reduced the Palestinians living within the Israeli state as citizens of the Israeli state to second-class citizens, on the one hand promoting Jewish nationalism and Jewish nationalist parties, on the other hand doing everything within its power to suppress and eliminate Palestinian or Arab nationalist movements. And that's why today there's a consensus among all major human rights organizations that Israel is an apartheid state. What the Israeli Human Rights Organization, B'Tselem, describes a regime of Jewish supremacy between the river and the sea.
You're really tempting a response from the other side on the last few sentences. We'll talk about the claims of apartheid and so on. It's a fascinating discussion. We need to have it. Norm?
On the question of the responsibility of the Palestinian Arabs for the Nazi Holocaust, direct or indirect, I consider that an absurd claim. As Gromyko said, and I quoted him, the entire Western world turned its back on the Jews. To somehow focus on the Palestinians strikes me as completely ridiculous. Number two, as Moeen said, there's a perfectly understandable reason why Palestinian Arabs wouldn't want Jews, because in their minds, and not irrationally, these Jews intended to create a Jewish state, which would quite likely have resulted in their expulsion. I'm a very generous person. I've actually taken in a homeless person for 2.5 years. But if I knew in advance that that homeless person was going to try to turn me out of my apartment, I would think 10,000 times before I took him in. Okay? As far as the actual complicity of the Palestinian Arabs, if you look at Raoul Hilberg's 3-volume classic work, The Destruction of the European Jewry, he has in those 1,000+ pages one sentence on the role of the Mufti of Jerusalem. And that, I think, is probably an overstatement, but we'll leave it aside. The only 2 points I would make aside from the Holocaust point is, number one, I do think the transfer discussion is useful because it indicates that there was a rational reason behind the Arab resistance to Jewish or Zionist immigration to Palestine, the fear of territorial displacement and dispossession. And number two, there are 2 issues. One is the history, and the second is being responsible for your words. Now, some people accuse me of speaking very slowly, and they're advised on YouTube to turn up the speed 2 to 3 times whenever I'm on. One of the reasons I speak slowly is because I attach value to every word I say. And it is discomforting, disorienting, where you have a person who's produced a voluminous corpus, rich in insights and rich in archival sources, who seems to disown each and every word that you pluck from that corpus by claiming that it's either out of context or it's cherry picking. Words count. And I agree with Lex. Everybody has the right to rescind what they've said in the past. But what you cannot claim is that you didn't say what you said.
I'll stick to the history, not the current propaganda. 1917, the Zionist movement began way before the British supported the Zionist movement for decades. In 1917, the British jumped in and issued the Balfour Declaration supporting the emergence of a Jewish national home in Palestine, which most people understood to mean eventual Jewish statehood in Palestine. Most people understood that in Britain and in Israel, among the Zionists and among the Arabs. But the British declared the Balfour Declaration, or issued the Balfour Declaration, not only because of imperial self-interest, and this is what you're basically saying. They had the imperial interests, a buffer state which would protect the Suez Canal from the east. The British also were motivated by idealism, and this incidentally is how Balfour described the reasoning behind issuing the declaration. And he said the Western world, Western Christendom, owes the Jews a great debt, both for giving the world and the West, if you like, values, social values as embodied in the Bible, social justice and all sorts of other things, and the Christian world owes the Jews because it persecuted them for 2,000 years. This debt we're now beginning to repay with the 1917 declaration favoring Zionism. But it's also
Shots fired. The Christian world owes the Jews because it persecuted them for 2,000 years. Aww. I mean, I have no doubt that the Christian world definitely persecuted them. I mean, I am an atheist, but I grew up in a Christian culture. So I kind of know what the Christians would say if they wanted to clap back to that. Like if you were an anti-Zionist Christian, you might say something like, well, we persecuted you for 2,000 years because you killed our God. I don't know. The Western world, the Western Christendom owes Jews a great debt. So here's what we'll do. We'll stick you in a country where there's like 9% Christians and like 80% Muslims and like 12% Jews. We'll stick you there. Okay? We totally owe you one. We totally owe you one. So we'll let you come to America? No, you actually get to go to, hey, how about the place where Moses and all those guys were? And Jesus. You could go to Bethlehem. Yeah. From the Bible. Why don't you just go there? All right. We owed you one. Christendom. So that's, I think, he's saying this is from the Balfour Declaration. And the Christian world owes the Jews because it persecuted them for 2,000 years. There are quotes around that. Is that actually quoted from the book or from the Balfour? Maybe we should read the Balfour Declaration. What does it say? Gonna figure it out. What does it say? Gonna figure it out. What does it say?
Them for 2,000 years. This debt we're now beginning to repay with the 1970s. The world behind issuing the declaration. And he said the Western world, Western Christendom, owes the Jews a great debt, both for giving the world and the West, if you like, values, social values as embodied in the Bible, social justice and all sorts of other things.
Social justice? All right. This is the actual letter. November 2nd, 1917, Foreign Office. Cool typeset there. I like the goofy unevenness of it. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. That's interesting. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to knowledge of the Zionist Federation. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. It is clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Okay, so they didn't follow that at all. Jesus Christ. Can you imagine, like, how did you fucking read this shit back in the day? There's so much. What parts of the... Oh, they don't have headlines, you know? Colonial Times. What is it but a map of busy life, its fluctuations, and its vast concerns? Cowper? Okay, this is 1841. Jesus, what are we doing this far back? This thing was 1817. Palestinian Arab delegation and the Zionist organization. It's a public statement issued by the British government announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for Jewish people. Is that literally the whole Balfour Declaration? Was that one letter I read? it just reminds me of like kids asking their mom, like they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go build a fort, and we're gonna like build a treehouse and an awesome fort, and we're gonna make stick weapons, and then we're gonna hit all the other kids." And then you run up to your parents, stop you. They're like, "Wait, where are you going? What are you doing?" We're just gonna go build a treehouse. No, like, come on, please. All right. You can build a treehouse, but you better not be mean to the other kids. No hitting, no kicking, no violence, no weapons, okay? If you promise that, I'll let you have your treehouse. Okay. Yes, we got the treehouse. Don't worry, we'll still get the weapons. All right? As soon as we got our treehouse, we can hide the weapons up there. So, they got their Balfour Declaration. But imagine, that's in 1917. 30 years later, they're doing a full-scale, large-scale atrocity, kicking out 700,000 people. Okay, there was nothing in this about how Christianity or Christians owed a great debt to the Jews. Is this something that's found outside of this document? These political considerations were supported by a sympathetic evangelical Christian sentiment towards the restoration of the Jews. Christian Zionism is a political and religious ideology that in Christian context espouses the return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land. Likewise, it holds that the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 was in accordance with biblical prophecies. Okay, yeah. I don't think owed the Jews a great debt. Where is that? The local Christian and Muslim community of Palestine, who constituted 90% of Palestine, strongly opposed the declaration. As Edward Said in 1979, it was perceived as being made by a European power about a non-European territory, in a flat disregard of both the presence and the wishes of the native majority residents in that territory, and it took the form of a promise about the same territory in another foreign group. Yeah. There was something about the whole, and the civil and legal rights of the non-Jewish people shall not be infringed. There was something kind of winky naughty about that. It was something kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights. Right? And then what is His Majesty? What is His Majesty's definition of civil rights? What does it mean to prejudice someone's rights? Prejudice means prejudge. Nothing shall be done which may prejudge the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. Yeah, I think the Palestinian Christian and Muslim people who made up 90% of the population were kind of seeing through that and saying, no, this is not good. Even if you tell them, oh, they shall not do anything that may prejudice our civil rights, they don't know what that means. They're just going to fucking kill us and bulldoze our houses and drive us off the land. Do murder and shit. So, yeah, it makes sense. Does it say anything about a debt? About owing? Because Benny Moore says the Western world, Christendom owes the Jews a great debt, both for giving the world and the West, if you like, values, social values as embodied in the Bible. Why would Christian owe the Jews a great debt because of what's in the Bible? Christians have the Bible. They don't need the Jews to teach them the Bible. They have two Bibles. They have the Jewish Bible and they have another one. And all sorts of other things. And Christian world owes the Jews because it persecuted them for 2,000 years. It persecuted them. Such a weird way to look at that. Because I don't think it's right to say that all Christians persecuted Jews. It's maybe all the people that persecuted Jews happen to be Christian, but I don't think that's true either. I mean, even these guys would say it was a lot of Muslims that were persecuting them, right? But as far as I've read, the Christian Zionism is not about like what's good for the Jews. It's about fulfilling biblical prophecy and bringing about the end times. And the Jews will not have a good time when that happens because they're all going to hell according to the prophecies. It's just that they have to all gather in Israel, like before Jesus can come back, right? That's why they thought 1948 was the fulfilling of a biblical prophecy. I don't know. This is a weird claim. We're going to have to dig into this more. What Christians are saying, well, we owe the Jews a great debt. First of all, because of all these social embodied in the Bible, like social justice. What? Where's social justice in the Bible? Where the fuck is social? I was just reading something like in the Bible. It was like, oh yeah, if you have sex with a woman, and like she's like engaged to another guy, it's okay. You don't have to be put to death, but we will punish the woman for that. And you don't have to be put to death though, because she's just a slave. It was actually something I was reading recently. So remember, we were reading a little bit of the Bible, the story of Solomon splitting the baby. Solomon splitting the baby. But we owe a great debt to the Jews for giving the world this value. If a man has sex with a slave woman who's promised in marriage to someone else, he must pay a fine, but they are not to be put to death. After all, she was still a slave at the time. The man must bring a ram to the entrance of the sacred tent and give it to a priest, who will then offer it as a sacrifice to me, so the man's sins will be forgiven. Do not eat the blood of any animal. Do not practice any kind of witchcraft. I forbid you to shave any part of your head or beard, or to cut and tattoo yourself as a way of worshiping the dead. Don't let your daughters serve as temple prostitutes. This would bring disgrace both to them and the land. This is interesting, the way it's phrased. It says, don't shave part of your head or beard or to cut and tattoo yourself as a way of worshiping the dead. So does that mean I can still cut myself as a way of worshiping the dead? Or I can tattoo myself to worship the dead, but I must not cut and tattoo myself in order to worship the dead. What if I cut and tattoo myself as a way to express myself? What if it's not for the purpose of worshiping the dead? Is it okay then? Yeah, odd wording. When you have these compound, I'm going to find a different translation. 21st century King James Version. That's interesting. Let's see, what was I? Okay, 27:28. Let's see what King James Version says. Ye shall not round off the corners of your heads, neither shalt thou mar the corners of thy beard. Ye shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord. Okay. The order makes it sound different. This sounds like it says you're not allowed to cut yourself for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. It doesn't say for what reason. It just says don't do it. Now, I would argue that it doesn't just include tattoos. It says just don't print any marks upon you. You could say, I'm not printing, I'm writing with a marker. I would say, hey, you got me. Rules are rules. But translations matter. What about the American Standard? Does it sound any different? Ye shall not round the corners of your heads, neither shalt thou mar the corners of thy beard. It's exactly the same. Ye shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am Jehovah. I am Jehovah. That's the American Standard. Okay, what about God's Word translation? I've never heard of this one. God's Word translation says, Ye shall not round the corners of your head, neither shalt thou mar the corners of thy beard. Why does it sound exact? Oh, okay, it was still on American Standard. Okay. It says never shave the hair on your foreheads. What? Hair on your forehead? Never cut the edges of your beard. The edges of your beard. Never slash your body to mourn the dead. Interesting. This one says mourn the dead versus worship the dead versus for the dead. Never slash your body to mourn the dead. Okay, don't cut yourself just because you're sad. And never get a tattoo. I am the Lord. Interesting. If a man has sexual intercourse with a female slave who is engaged to another man, and if her freedom was never bought or given to her, they should not be put to death. He will only pay a fine because she is a slave. So, that exception proves a rule that if you have a sexual intercourse with a free woman, you shall be put to death. really great. Benny, the Western world owes the Jews a great debt, both for giving the world and the West, if you like, values. Social values as embodied in the Bible, social justice, and all sorts of other things. Wow. Wow. Wow, dude. That's some fucking... just say wow for 10 minutes. This is just so fucking bonkers in every way. Bible, Christian doesn't owe the Jews a debt for teaching the world values from the Bible. They're going to claim credit for that. Now, yes, the first part of the Bible is the same. It's the Torah, you know. So technically, yeah, they owe you for having that. Although they didn't have to have that. They, you know, that it was their choice to just include that in their holy book. And only because their guy, Jesus, also thought that was still the holy scripture. And he said, like, it's still the scriptures. So Christians decided, well, we're going to take the Jewish Bible and this other Bible and put them together and make it the Bible. So, yeah, I guess you could say Christendom owes the Jews a great debt. So how did they repay that debt of giving us the Bible? Well, let's just fuck over the Palestinians for the next 100 years. Great idea. And then this was really weird too. He said, and the Christian world owes the Jews because it persecuted them for 2,000 years. This debt we're now beginning to repay with the 1917 Declaration favoring Zionism. So he's saying that this was the reasoning behind issuing the Declaration. The Declaration, we just read it. Let's pull it back up. We literally read the whole Declaration. It's to a guy called Lord Rothschild from some scribble motherfucker who works at the Foreign Office and is speaking on behalf of His Majesty's government. So who wrote public statement issued by the British government? So Benny's trying to make us believe the British declared the Balfour Declaration not only because of imperial self-interest, and this is what you're basically saying, they had imperial interests, a buffer state, which would protect the Suez Canal from the east. The British were also motivated by idealism. And this, incidentally, is how Balfour described the reasoning behind issuing the Declaration. Balfour described the reasoning behind issuing the Declaration. Okay, so that's maybe not in the Declaration itself. Who is Balfour? Balfour, why did he do it? Why did he do it? No, not William Balfour. Balfour Declaration. Motivation. In an effort to win the support of Jewish communities in both allied countries like the United States and enemy countries like Austria-Hungary, the UK Foreign Secretary signed the Balfour Declaration vowing to set up a national home. It's from Imperial War Museum. Why? Why did Britain promise Palestine to Arabs and Zionists? When the Balfour Declaration was signed, the British had already promised Palestine to Arabs as an independent state and promised the French government that it would be an internationally administered zone. Even then, most of the land was still under Ottoman control. So why did Britain make these three conflicting promises? I gotta watch a video to find out? I just want to read it. I don't have time to watch a fucking video. They'll take me 17 hours. We're already watching a video. The declaration turned the Zionist aim of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine into reality when Britain publicly... The pledge is generally viewed as one of the main catalysts of the Nakba. The statement came in the form of a letter from Britain's then Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, addressed to Lionel Walter Rothschild, the figurehead of the British Jewish community. It was made during World War I, was included in the terms of the British mandate for Palestine after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. The so-called mandate system set up by Allied powers was a thinly veiled form of colonialism and occupation. Okay, is there anything about doing this declaration because Christians felt that they owed a debt to Jewish people? Why was it issued? Some argue that many in the British government at the time were Zionists themselves. Others say the declaration was issued out of an anti-Semitic reasoning that giving Palestine to the Jews would be a solution to the Jewish problem. Oh boy. In mainstream academia, however, there are a set of reasons over which there's a general consensus. Control over Palestine was a strategic imperial interest to keep Egypt and the Suez Canal within Britain's sphere of influence. Okay, Benny did mention that. Everyone mentioned that. He said it's not only because of this. They had imperial interests, sure, but that wasn't all, okay? And that's apparently true because there's other things, right? However, that is a big one. And that, it's like, that's sufficient. The declaration meant that Palestine would come under British occupation and the Palestinian Arabs who lived there would not gain independence. It introduced a notion that was reportedly unprecedented in international law, that of a national home. The use of the vague term national home left the meaning open to interpretation. Earlier drafts of the document did say Jewish state. That was later changed. In a meeting with Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann in 1922, Balfour and then Prime Minister David Lloyd George reportedly said that the declaration always meant an eventual Jewish state. His name is Arthur. What a dickhead. True dickhead. Why was it issued? Control over Palestine. Okay, keep Egypt. Britain had to sign with the Zionists to rally support among Jews in the United States and Russia, hoping they would encourage their governments to stay in the war until victory. Okay. Intense Zionist lobbying and strong connection between the Zionist community in Britain and the British government. Some of the officials in the government were Zionists themselves. And finally, Jews were being persecuted in Europe, and the British government was sympathetic to their suffering. Okay. There's a hyperlink. Is this just to Europe? Okay, Europe news. I hate those kind of hyperlinks when it's like, Jews were being persecuted in Europe. Like, oh, you imagine you'd click on that and you'd get like some link about the Jews being persecuted. Instead, it's just like, here's Europe news for today. Oh, big old soccer game. Check it out. That's not what I want. Okay, I'm curious about any of this, if there's any supposed evidence that there were these Christian Zionists who declared that they owed Jews a great debt for their persecution. I'm willing to believe it. I just haven't seen that anywhere yet. Who knows? It sounds like it could be in like a letter from Arthur Balfour, who or some interview with him later. Because it sounds like he did, in fact, intend, when he wrote that, he intended that to mean state. And they changed it to home. National home. Something fucky about it, though. I got my eye on you, Benny Morris. I'm watching your ass. And you step 1 foot out of line and I'll get your ass. I'll get it. All right. Let's keep going. You talk your shit, buddy. We're gonna get back to it.
In the Bible, social justice and all sorts of other things. And the Christian world owes the Jews because it persecuted them for 2,000 years. This debt we're now beginning to repay with the 1917 declaration favoring Zionism. But it's also worth remembering that the Jews weren't proxies or attached to the British imperial endeavor. They were happy to receive British support in 1917, and then subsequently when the British ruled Palestine for 20, 30 years, but they weren't part of the British imperial design or mission. They wanted a state for themselves, the Jews, happy to have the British support them, happy today to have the Americans support Israel. But it's not because we're stooges or extensions of American imperial interests. The British, incidentally, are always described in Arab narratives or propaganda as consistent supporters of Zionism. They weren't. The first British rulers in Palestine, 1917, 1920.
Herbert Samuel.
No, before Herbert Samuel.
The first British rulers in Palestine, 1917, 1920. He says Herbert Samuel. No, before Herbert Samuel. Samuel came in 1920. You said 1920. You said 1920 and he said Herbert Samuel. And you're like, no, Herbert Samuel came in 1920. Benny, you're a little fucking twerp.
And as consistent supporters of Zionism, they weren't. The first British rulers in Palestine, 1917, 1920.
Herbert Samuel.
No, before Herbert Samuel. Samuel came in 1920. The British ruled there for 3 years previously, and most of the leaders, the British generals and so on, who were in Palestine, were anti-Zionist. And subsequently, in the 20s and 30s, the British occasionally curbed Zionist immigration to Palestine, and in 1939 switched horses and supported the Arab national movement and not Zionism. They switched narratives or propaganda as consistent supporters of Zionism. They weren't. The first British rulers in Palestine, 1917, 1920.
Herbert Samuel.
No, before Herbert Samuel. Samuel came in 1920. The British ruled there for 3 years previously, and most of the leaders, the British generals and so on, who were in Palestine, were anti-Zionist. And subsequently, in the 20s and 30s, the British occasionally...
That's because Zionist forces were fighting against British. When Britain was occupying Palestine, they were getting it from Zionists and from Arabs. They're getting it from everyone. Because Britain is a fucking motherfucker. Nobody wants their fucking country to be occupied. So there were nationalist movements on every side trying to fuck off those British people. Of course, these British guys are going to be anti-Zionist. They're also anti-Arab, or they probably just play whatever side they can against each other.
Curbed Zionist immigration to Palestine, and in 1939 switched horses and supported the Arab national movement and not Zionism. They turned anti-Zionist and basically said, you Arabs will rule Palestine within the next 10 years. This is what we're giving you by limiting Jewish immigration to Palestine. But the Arabs didn't actually understand what they were being given on a silver platter, Husseini again, and he said, no, we can't accept the British White Paper of May 1939, which had given the Arabs everything they wanted, basically, self-determination in an Arab majority state. So what I'm saying is the British at some point did support the Zionist enterprise, but at other points were less consistent in this support. And in 1939, until 1948, when they didn't vote even for partition, for Jewish statehood in Palestine in the UN resolution, they didn't support Zionism during the last decade of the mandate. It's worth remembering that.
I'd like to respond to that. I mean, speaking of propaganda, I find it simply impossible to accept that Balfour, who, as British Prime Minister in 1905, was a chief sponsor of the Aliens Act, which was specifically
He changed his mind.
which was specifically designed
To
to
keep out
keep
Jews.
persecuted Eastern European Jews out of the streets
But he changed
of the
his mind.
UK, and who was denounced as an anti-Semite by the entire British Jewish establishment. A decade later, all of a sudden,
Changed his mind.
people change their minds, but when the changing of the mind just coincidentally happens to coincide with the British imperial interest, I think perhaps the transformation is a little more superficial than he's being given credit for. It was clearly a British imperial venture, and if there had been no threat to the Suez Canal during World War I, regardless of what Balfour would have thought about the Jews and their contribution to history and their persecution and so on, there would have been no Balfour
Can I ask
Declaration.
real quick as a question on that? Why did the British ever cap immigration then from Jews to that area at all?
Well, we're talking now about
20s and
1970.
30s.
I
Sure,
think-
but I'm saying that if the
No,
whole goal was just to be an imperialist project, like there were terrorist attacks from Jewish, from
yes, but you're talking. I'll answer
yeah, in the
you.
40s, yeah.
And we're talking now about 1917, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't think the British had a Jewish state in mind. That's why they used the term Jewish national home. I think what they wanted was a British protectorate, loyal to and dependent upon the British. I think an outstanding review of British policy towards these issues during the mandate has been done by Martin Bunton of the University of Victoria, and he basically makes the argument that once the British realized the mess they were in, certainly by the late 20s, early 30s, they recognized the mess they were in, the irreconcilable differences, and basically pursued a policy of just muddling on, and muddling on in the context of British rule in Palestine, whose overall purpose was to serve for the development of Zionist institutions, Yeshuv's economy, and so on, meant, even if the British were not self-consciously doing this, preparing the groundwork for the eventual establishment of a Jewish state. I don't know if that answers your question.
Except they did turn anti-Zionist in 1939.
Yes, of course.
And
because
maintained
they were being
that
shot up by
maintained that Zionist.
Yeah.
No, before they were being shot up, but maintained that anti-Zionist posture until 1948.
Okay.
And if I may, just also one point. You mentioned Hajamin al-Husseini during World, entirely legitimate. But what I would also point out is that you had a Zionist organization, the Lehi,
300 people. More or less.
300 people, one of whom happened to become an Israeli prime minister, an Israeli foreign minister, a speaker of Israeli parliament.
Maybe you should give his name.
Yitzhak Shamir, proposing an alliance with Nazi Germany in 1941.
Shamir proposed.
Well, no, the Lehi. proposed,
Some people in the Lehi proposed.
of which Shamir
Yeah,
was a
but
prominent
this is
leader.
a red herring also.
No. Okay, well, if he's a red herring, Hajj
The
bin
Lehi was an
Hussein is a red whale. I'm sorry.
The Lehi was an unimportant organization.
Hajj bin,
Maybe you should give his name.
Yitzhak Shamir proposing an alliance with Nazi Germany in 1941.
Shamir proposed.
Well, no, the Lehi proposed.
Some people in the Lehi proposed.
Of which Shamir
Yeah,
was a
but
prominent
this is
leader.
a red herring also.
No. Okay, well, if he's a red herring, Hajj bin
Lehi was
Hussein
an
is a red whale. I'm sorry.
The Lehi was an unimportant organization in the Yishuv. 300 people versus 30,000 belonged to the Haganah. So it was not a very important organization. It's true, before the Holocaust actually began, they wanted allies against the British where they could
We're
find
talking
them. And
1941 here, not
1940. We're talking
1931.
1940.
41 from what I recall.
1940. They approached the
The
German emissary in
Ankara,
Istanbul or something.
yes.
Istanbul.
And
But they-
if I may, proposed an alliance with Nazi Germany on what the Lehi described as
the
on the
Lehi was
basis of
reviled by the
shared
mainstream of Zionism.
shared
they were-
ideological
no, they didn't
principles.
share ideological.
Well, they said they did.
No,
They
they didn't.
said.
They reviled.
Why are you doing these things? Of
the
course
Lehi
they
was
said it.
reviled
You
by the
know the
majority.
state, but
The
you
Lehi
know
was
that
reviled.
you know what the statement said on the basis of a shared ideology. Why do you say no?
Do you think that
You
the
could
Lehi,
just-
wait, the
when you
Lehi people
say-
were Nazis? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying
They
that's
said
what
they
they
were.
said.
No, are you saying that? Forget
Okay.
statements. You like to
Okay.
quote things, but
I
were
do
they
like to
were
quote
they
things.
Nazis?
It's called fact.
We are going off the fucking rails. Benny boy, you are floundering. You are floundering. Okay, so this is big news. I don't know anything about Lehi. The Lehi proposed an alliance with Nazi Germany. They approached the German emissary in Istanbul, proposed an alliance with Nazi Germany on what the Lehi described as on the basis of shared ideological principles. So Benny's like, first of all, they're a very tiny organization. They're very small. They're very unimportant. No, they didn't share an ideology. They said they did. No, but they reviled. Why are you doing these things? Of course they said that. The Lehi was reviled by the majority. But you know what the statement said. On the basis of a shared ideology. Why do you say no? Do you think the Lehi people were Nazis? Is that what you're saying? I'm saying they said they were. They said, no, you're saying that. Forget statements. You like to quote things. You like to forget statements. They said that the Lehi made a statement that said that they shared ideology with the Nazis. He says, no, you're saying that. Forget statements. You like to quote things. Holy crap. Holy crap. Okay, this is definitely going to have to... Oh boy, we're at 2 hours. Yeah, we're gonna have to push this till tomorrow. Because we have to look into this other thing. Because yeah, before we were talking about what's his ass, Husseini. So Husseini was this dude in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Actually, he lived up into till his 70s, which was in the 70s, right? So, and he was a Palestinian guy who got really politically active, trying to make a Palestinian national movement, ended up fleeing Palestine, living in Nazi Germany for 4 years, and having meetings with Hitler. So he was fucked up. And everyone agrees he's fucked up. And he was a shitty guy. Benny's always trying to say like he was the leader of the movement. So like he was a leader of a movement, wasn't necessarily like the big head guy, because most people didn't really get down with Nazi Germany. You know, he was a fucked up freak like that. And we've talked about this. We've gone back and forth with it. You know, the pro-Palestinian side, Norm and Moeen, they have no issue admitting that fact, that that's a real thing that he did. And yeah. But then Moeen is like, well, you know, now that you want to get into it, now that you want to start saying some shit, because Benny just went off. He already had his quote-unquote final statement, but once he heard these two, he just couldn't help himself, and he did a little bit of a Gish Gallop, because I think this might be the longest he's talked. I'll stick to the history, not the current propaganda. So he starts right at 149.56. So this is Blue Benny. He starts here into the 50th minute. And he goes 52. Herbert Samuel. Okay. Moeen comes in, drops a name. But he plows along. It's worth remembering. Okay, so up until 53... 24, 50, 51, 52, 53, 15, 20, almost 25. All right. Let's color it in. Let's see how it looks. Yeah, that's his longest monologue since the opening statement. Although this was for 5.5 minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's not quite as long. But it's definitely longer than he spoke before. Not quite as long as Moeen talked, though. Moeen in purple, his closing statement was quite more. But then he's like, okay, well, now I got to clap back. You've tempted me into responding. I'd like to respond to that, he says. I find it impossible. Now, then we're going to have a lot of overtalk, but basically, Benny just kind of says he changed his mind. He changed his mind. Changed his mind. Up until 154. 154. 154.41-ish.
And their persecution and so on, there would have been no Balfour Declaration.
154.45. 54.45. So we're purple. That's our 45 mark. And then Stephen, may I ask you it's a question on that. Why did the British ever cap immigration then from Jews to that area at all? This was in the 1920s to 30s, my dude.
Real quick, as a question on that. Why did the British ever cap immigration then from Jews to that area at all?
Well, we're talking now about
20s and 30s.
1970.
Sure, but I'm saying that if the whole goal was just to be an imperialist project, like there were terrorist attacks from Jewish
Yes, but you're talking.
imperialist project. Like there were terrorist attacks from Jewish.
Yes, but you're talking. I'll answer
Yeah, in the
you.
40s. Yeah.
And we're talking now about 1917, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't think the British had a Jewish state in mind. That's why they used the term Jewish national home. I think what they wanted was a British protectorate, loyal to and dependent upon the British. I think an outstanding review of British policy towards these issues during the Mandate has been done by Martin Bunton of the University of Victoria, and he basically makes the argument that once the British realized the mess they were in, certainly by the late 20s, early 30s, they recognized the mess they were in, the irreconcilable differences, and basically pursued a policy of just muddling on, and muddling on in the context of British rule in Palestine, whose overall purpose was to serve for the development of Zionist institutions, Yeshuv's economy, and so on, meant Yes.
1939,
Yes, of course,
and
because
maintained
they were being
that
shot up by
and maintained that
because-
Zionist. No, before they were being shot up, but maintained that anti-Zionist posture until 1948.
Okay.
And if I may, just also one point. You mentioned Haj Amin al-Husseini during World, entirely legitimate. But what I would also point out is that you had a Zionist organization, the Lehi,
300 people. More
300 people, one of whom happened to become an Israeli prime minister, an Israeli foreign minister, a speaker of Israeli parliament.
Maybe you should give his name.
Yitzhak Shamir, proposing an alliance with Nazi Germany in 1941.
Shamir proposed.
Well, no, the Lehi proposed.
Some people in the Lehi proposed.
Of which Shamir
yeah,
was a
but
prominent
this is
leader.
a red herring also.
No. Okay, well, if he's a red herring, Haj
The Lehi
Amin
was
Hussein is a red whale. I'm sorry.
The Lehi was an unimportant organization.
If he's a red herring, Husseini is a red whale. Boo, 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 boo. Love that debate nerd here humor. Well, if this is a red herring, then that's a red whale. Yeah, I have to agree. If you're putting a lot of focus on one guy from 50 years before the Nakba to try to spin the Nakba, it could be a little bit of a red herring. So I think the only reason Rabbani is bringing this up is because, Moeen Rabbani is only really brought this up because Benny Morris had to snap off and then start going on and on about the Nazi guy, the guy who collaborated with Nazis, Husseini. I call him Insaney because of the fact that he worked with Hitler. That's what I call him. All right, this is too much. It's too much for me. I can't deal with this. There's way too much over talking. We're gonna have to slow this down. We're gonna have to back it up. We're gonna have to figure out what's going on. But I think that's enough for tonight. So we're gonna call it a night. Thank you for watching. But I told you shouldn't have because it was boring. Anyway, but I hope you learned something. Yeah, let's call it a night.
But not just watch up debate. He has to stop it and wait and go back and watch again to get straight. Hour 8, it's only been 10 minutes and he'll aggravate you. So don't watch unless you want to. So don't watch unless you want to. So don't watch unless you want to. This is gonna take a long, long time, but we'll visit lots of long, long time. But we'll visit lots of rabbit holes along the way. We'll talk and we'll learn, we'll flock around and find out. We'll figure out who was right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Ooh. Right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Ooh. Right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Kudos is gonna watch a debate, but not just watch a debate. He has to stop it and wait, and go back and watch again to get it straight. Hour 8, he's only been 10 minutes in, he'll aggravate you. So don't watch unless you want to. So don't watch unless you want to. So don't watch unless you want to. So don't watch. This is gonna take a long, long, long time. We'll visit lots of rabbit holes along the way. We'll talk and we'll learn, we'll flock around and find out. We'll figure out who was right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Time to watch a debate, but not just watch a debate. You have to stop it and wait and go back and watch again to get it straight. Hour 8, he's only been 10 minutes and he'll aggravate you. So don't watch unless you want to. So don't watch unless you want to. So don't watch unless you want to. This is going to take a long, long, long time. But we'll visit lots of rabbit holes along the way. We'll talk and we'll learn, we'll flock around to find out. We'll figure out who was right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. It's gonna take a long, long time, but we'll visit lots of rabbit holes along the way. We'll talk and we'll learn, we'll flock around and find out. We'll figure out who was right and wrong, right and wrong, right and wrong. Oh, 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 oh. Right and wrong, right and wrong. So don't watch, it'll take a long, long time, but we'll visit lots of rabbit holes